Hello, everyone. I'd like to welcome you to another edition of Justice for the 110. My name is Jeremy Ellis, and I am extremely excited about today's guest and what you're going to learn from everything that's been happening around the exploration with the Clotilda. Today, we have someone who I had the privilege of meeting several years ago, and he is something that you're going to learn more about. He's a Black scuba diver. He's a lead diving instructor for diving with a purpose, and he was one of the original members of the team that founded Clotilda, as well as one of the team members that participated in the 10-day exploration that took place in May of this year for Clotilda. And so I would like to introduce the audience to Kamau Sadiki. Welcome to Justice for the 110. And then just personally, thank you for your work and for everything that you've been doing to help keep this story alive and to tell this story. So welcome to the podcast.
Yeah, well, thank you, Jeremy. It's really a pleasure to be on your podcast, Justice for the 110. And I want to thank you, for continuing this critical work and continuing to tell this very, very critically important story, not just particularly for the African community, but this is a global story. It has global impacts, and we should never ever think about letting it fall into the backward files of history. So keep it up in the forefront. So thank you.
Absolutely. So we want to get to talking about your recent explorations, your first one when you actually helped to discover Clotilda. We want to talk about the 10-day exploration as well. But before we get there, I think it's important that we introduce you to the audience and specifically who you are, how long have you been a scuba diver? I'm interested in just, there's been a number of podcasts that I've been able to participate in, be a part of, but learn also about Black scuba divers. So can you kind of share with us who you are, how you got into scuba diving, and a little bit about just the network of Black scuba divers?
Sure, Jeremy. I'll be happy to do that. And at the end of this piece, maybe if you're interested in scuba diving, we can work something out. Huh?
I am interested in scuba diving, and I've thought about getting licensed here in Atlanta, where I reside. So we can definitely talk about that offline and figure out how I can get certified.
Absolutely, yeah. We have a very strong Black scuba diving family in the Atlanta area, so that would be very easy to do. As you mentioned, I'm Kamau Sadiki, and I'm a lead instructor and board member with Diving with a Purpose, an organization that is committed to resurrecting the stories and histories and narratives of not only the slave ships, but the people that were on those vessels during the transatlantic and what we call the transoceanic slave trade. We've been around, DWP been around for about 17 years now, and we're still working on some very critical projects, and Clotilda being one of those. It was very almost circumstance that I got involved in scuba diving, Jeremy. I had the very fortunate opportunity to meet a gentleman by the name of Dr. Albert Jose Jones, and it would be great to get him on your podcast, actually, because to kind of put Dr. Jones into context, Jacques Cousteau is the Black Dr. Jones. So he's an incredible individual. He started scuba diving back in 1956. And I said 1956, and he still wants to get in the water today. But I met him while I was working. I retired in 2017. While I was working at the national level, I was traveling a lot, managing the nation's 21,000 megawatts of hydropower assets. So I was coming back to Washington, D.C. I was coming through the Dallas-Fort Worth airport, and I saw this elderly gentleman. He traveled a lot as well, and so he was coming back from some remote location, but he was worn out and he was just nodding, his head bent over. And I noticed all these scuba diving patches all over this jacket that he was wearing. And one of them, I had just finished reading this book, by the way, called Spirit Dive. And Spirit Dive is about the slave ship Henrietta Marie. And one of the patches on his left shoulder was the Henrietta Marie. And that was my gateway opportunity, my entree into starting a conversation with him after he came out of his nod and woke up. And, you know, he was a very gracious individual. He talked to me about his scuba diving adventures. He had a bunch of literature with him. He gave me a bunch of magazines. And he asked me, am I going back to Washington, D.C.? I said, yeah, I'm living there now. I had just moved from Portland, Oregon. And he said, well, you should come to our dive training. We're just getting started. And I went, and, you know, the rest is history. So Dr. Jones is a PhD environmental, I forgot his title, but he's environmental biologist, something like that. And he's the only African American that has been inducted in the International Scuba Divers Hall of Fame. He's gotten all other sort of awards and so forth and so on. So Dr. Jones trained me to be a scuba diver. I'm very honored for that fact. Again, to sort of put it into context, Jeremy, the Professional Association of Dive Instructors, and Dr. Jones is a master instructor, they have a certification process that as you come in, you get a number. And right now it's up in something like the 4 million or something people that's been certified, right? And so his number is 1,081. So he was one of those early individuals, and so I'm very proud to be a part of that. So he went on to establish in 1959 an organization called Underwater Adventure Seekers here in Washington, D.C., which has been around again for almost 64 years. And after he established the Underwater Adventure Seekers in 1991, he established the National Association of Black Scuba Divers, along with another one of his colleagues, Rick Powell, down in Miami. And I'm the immediate past president of that association, the National Association of Black Scuba Divers. And DWP sort of emerged out of what we call NABS, the National Association. Most of the divers in DWP are part or affiliated with NABS, at least when it got to start. So, you know, the rest has been history, man. It's been an incredible journey. No question, life transforming. Particularly after I retired over the last 5 years, it's just been incredible. And again, right after I retired, the work around the Clotilda started emerging. When they thought they initially found the ship and got engaged then.
How did you get involved with, you and I met, and you probably don't recall this, you've met a lot of descendants, and you've probably talking to a number of people in the Africatown community in the Mobile area, but you got involved in, how did you get involved in the Clotilda search?
Sure, yeah, that's a good story, good question. DWP is part of a partnership, a global partnership called the SlaveRex Project. And the SlaveRex Project is affiliated with the National Museum of African American History and Culture under the Smithsonian here in Washington, D.C. So when I think Ben Raines thought he had found the Clotilda back in January 2018, I don't want to show any disrespect, but I think the no-tilde started emerging when it wasn't the Clotilda. And so the Smithsonian had been involved in some community outreach work in the community in Africatown. But on the archaeology side, there was some connections there where the Alabama Historical Commission called on the Smithsonian for some assistance. It's to investigate this wreck that they thought was the Clotilda. So I was a part of that initial team, folks from the SlaveRex Project and search. Jim Delgado, of course, led the mission. And so we went down there to determine whether this was the Clotilda or not. And after some very initial observations and interrogation, we saw very clearly that it was not. But of course, that lit the spark, particularly in the community. Well, where is the Clotilda? And so the Alabama Historical Commission got engaged again and provided the resources for an extensive survey to be done of the river. So we brought in some high-tech equipment, some magnetometers, some sonar equipment, some sonar, ground penetrating sonar, subsurface sonar technologies to really do a entire search up and down the river. And we found a number of wrecks. And through the process of elimination, we came down to about 3. And then one was very, very promising. And we focused on that one, and it turned out to be fit all the parameters for the Clotilda: the size, the length, the breadth, the material it was made of, and so forth and so on. And so, well, this is it. And so from that point on, we've been trying to do more extensive investigations to get more information to help the community determine whether this was the vessel that brought their ancestors over here, your ancestors particularly, to the U.S. And we're absolutely confident that it is now. And so the mission back in May was to do further work and further analysis to add to the story.
And for our listeners that are hearing this for the first time, Professor James Delgado, we've had several interviews with him that are available on the site, and he actually speaks about some of those initial discovery and the process of elimination that they use to essentially confirm that this was Clotilda. So definitely recommend, if you have not already, go back and check out those interviews with Professor Delgado. I'm interested in, I do want to talk about the 10-day exploration, but just real quickly, when you were able to be a part of the group that confirmed and actually located the ship, what was that experience like for you? And kind of take us through locating the ship, when you found it, and then confirming the different stages, kind of how you felt being a part of the team.
Yeah, thanks, Jeremy, for that. I think it is a very important question for me, because it was a very humbling experience, to say the least. I remember when we were putting together the gear and the resources and getting all the logistics together just for the mission, which was challenging nonetheless. Thinking that, what does this really mean? What if, this is it? How do I, process all of this and its meaning? So as I was a support diver on the surface for the search folks. There was some issues with paperwork and so forth, so I was just a support diver on the surface for that July 2018 mission. And I remember the day was a very beautiful day. We went upriver, powered upriver. The river was very calm, and we got to the site and was just setting up, and I was thinking, is this the vessel that brought those 110 souls into this country against their will? What does it actually mean to actually see this vessel, even see a tangible piece of this vessel again, some 160 at the time, 158 years later, but now 162 years? How's it going to affect me? Through the whole experience, Jeremy, I was feeling these sort of emotions and feeling these different sort of energies. And so I remember when the diver went into the water, the visibility is virtually zero. You cannot see, right? So it's like diving, braille diving, you're feeling your way, right? And so we had surface to diver communications. We could actually talk to the diver. And so he was communicating, I'm sinking down, I cannot see. And then he said, I'm approaching what feels like the bow of a vessel. And that's the outwardmost part of the ship that's sticking up in the river. It said, it feels as if it's a bow. I said, wow, a bow? And Jeremy, if you look across the historical record of slave shipwrecks, no other bow exists. No other hull of a slave ship exists. You know, they've basically been destroyed or haven't been located yet. Most of these wrecks are scattered across a very broad landscape. But with the Clotilda, we actually have about 70 to 80% of the actual vessel still there. And so this diver was just describing what he was feeling. And I said, wow, is this the same vessel that, you know, um, Kojo Lewis Kazola felt? You know, that part of his DNA is in this vessel? You know, is this it? And he kept describing, I'm going down the side. I feel planking along the sides. And I got to a part called the bulkhead that separates, it's a wall in the ship. He said, I feel what I think is a bulkhead, but it's a lot of sediment. And he went on describing things. And then he said, I have a piece, there's a lot of debris around, back in 2018, there was a lot of debris around the vessel. And so he said, he picked up a little small piece that had a nail in it. A small piece of wood that had a nail in it that had fell off the vessel. And he said, I have this, and he brought it back to the ship, brought it back to our survey boat, rather. And he laid it on the deck, and he said, this is possibly a piece from the Clotilda. And that's when it really struck me, to actually lay eyes on a piece of the Clotilda 158 years later. And at that moment, I could sense the pain and suffering that your ancestors went through, man, and it was chilling, to say the least.
Hey, I hear your emotion. I literally, as part of the National Geographic Clotilda, the last slave ship filming, I had the privilege of being one of a few descendants that saw those artifacts, and a chill just went over my body the same way you're describing. That is, I couldn't even express myself in regards to how I felt, because you can feel the ancestors, you could feel the significance of that piece, and it wasn't a normal looking at an artifact. It wasn't the normal looking at a piece of wood, or like I could literally feel in me my ancestors' spirit, and it was chilling. It was for me when I first experienced it, and so I know I interrupted you, but
No problem. Yeah, no problem, because Jeremy, you're right on. You know, we do the archaeology, right? We do the science, we collect the data to help factually tell the story, right? But there's another very powerful dimension to this, and that's the embodied experience of these artifacts. The experience that is embodied in us when we see and touch and feel these artifacts. And I'm thinking more about that now. I'm going to be doing a paper on it later, but that's a very powerful experience. You know, that's the intangible aspect of this whole story that needs to be told as well. And so that I experienced that, and it was very profound. And
did you, at that moment, you talked about your feeling and what you experienced when you saw that artifact. Was that confirmation for you, or were you pretty confident that that was I mean, had you, I guess, did you get a different feeling compared to the other artifacts that y'all had identified through the survey? So, like, was that before confirming it, did it just give you a sense that this is Clotilda?
Oh,
that
absolutely.
It did. Yeah. You could tell.
Oh yes, absolutely. Based on, you know, all the stuff that we've known previously and investigations that were done, but when that piece emerged, it was just absolute confirmation that this was Clotilda. We knew it through examination of the data, but now it's just confirmation through this sensation, this feeling, this embodiment experience, that this is the vessel that these ancestors had this horrific experience in.
Did, still talking about this exploration, that first one, did you ever, you talked about you were on top supporting the divers. Was there ever a time that you were at that particular point that you were able to dive and actually feel the ship?
No. The environment was very very hazardous, to say the least. And so when we work on these partnerships, we work through an organization called the American Association for Underwater Scientists, and all these organizations are members of that. And we work together and collaborate. We have to have letters of reciprocity. And so all that paperwork wasn't done for me to get in the water then. And plus, again, we needed some very experienced divers in the water because the environment, there was trees, there was sharp objects protruding from the wreck, nails, there was some current, and add to all that, you couldn't see. So it was a very hazardous environment, to say the least. And so I think the best decision was made in terms of safety, for me not to get in the water at that particular time and provide support in other ways.
We didn't talk about this, but before you retire, what was your occupation?
Oh, sure. Yeah. I'm an engineer, and when I was tired, I was working for the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, and I was at the senior level managing what's called the hydropower business line. The U.S. Army Corps of Engineers has the largest assets of hydropower in the country, some 21,000 megawatts, and 75 projects all over the country. So I was the senior manager for all those projects for about 12 years or so before I retired. As a 300 million plus a year program. It's the largest producer of renewable energy in the country, and ranked in the top 10 in the world in terms of energy produced. So that's what I did.
So was there a correlation between, the reason I asked that question, I was trying to see if there, in regards to this work that you're doing with Clotilda, was there a correlation at all between your previous occupation and becoming a diver that helps you to with any other scientific work, or is it simply your diving experience that has helped you for Clotilda?
Well, I've always had aspiration to become a diver. I started swimming very early on in my younger days. I've been swimming for a very long time, but never got the opportunity to really pursue scuba diving. We had what we call commercial divers during my work with the Corps of Engineers that dove at our projects to do some of the very dangerous work in the water there. I observed some of those operations, but there's no sort of direct link to my work now in scuba diving. Yeah.
Okay, I just didn't know, so I was just curious. I was just more curious than anything. Sure. Let's fast forward to the May 2nd 10-day exploration. There's a very specific dive that I do want to get to during that 10-day exploration. But before we even talk about that chilling moment, can you kind of talk about the build up to that 10-day exploration for yourself, what that felt like, and then kind of what was your day-to-day role during that 10-day operation?
Yeah. So this was sort of like the next level of phase 3, as we call it, to doing the work around the archaeological work around the Clotilda. And my day-to-day was to assist with the artifact analysis, to dive the Clotilda this time, and make sure we got everything cataloged and documented correctly as artifacts was brought on board. to observe. The lead on in this mission was a very technically diving company called Resolve. Those guys was wow. They were doing some incredible stuff. I mean, they was in diving for 3 or 4 hours at a time in these conditions, and they was hitting it hard. So we had to clear the site, essentially, clean it up a little bit. There was large trees that gotten snagged on the wreck. So they removed all those trees and all those hazards from around the wreck, and then also did artifact extraction. Some disarticulated pieces of the wreck that has fallen off. Critical piece we was looking for, but didn't quite locate, but we know it's still there. It's called the trunk for the centerboard of the ship. The centerboard is essentially a rudder, a centerline rudder, if you will, that keeps the ships from rolling side to side. And when the Clotilda is underway in open water, it drops this down so it can sail in a stable sort of condition. And when it comes into shallow water, it lifts it up into the bottom of the boat so it can go into shallow draft. And so we found the trunk on one of the missions prior and laid it aside. So we know it's still there, but we couldn't quite locate it this time. So I was helping with all that documentation and assessing these artifacts, making sure things would get cataloged correctly and so forth and so on. And also to dive the Clotilda for the first time. And so my thoughts,
Well, let me ask you this. You tell me those thoughts. What was your, you knew you were going to dive for the first time going into the 10-day exploration. So can you just talk about the buildup that you felt going into the 10-day exploration? Like, I'm sure there had to be some excitement, some adrenaline, just leading up even to the May time frame. What was that experience like? Or how did you feel going up into that moment? Again, as we started to get to the 10-day exploration.
Yeah, there was a lot of preparation, a lot of pre-thought, a lot of emotional sort of feelings as well, anticipation. So I was thinking, what it's going to be like to actually get in the water and actually touch this vessel. Whether this is first time being on a real industrial mission. I've been on several missions. I've dove on 5 slave shipwrecks, but this one was very commercially and technically challenging, and so I had to step up the game a little bit to meet those requirements. But again, that other aspect was always right in front of me. What it's going to be like to actually touch a lot of the material that was part of this tragedy that happened to the 110. And so I thought, man, how can I sort of memorialize this moment, if you will, or honor this moment? So a dear friend of mine, Sabrina Johnson, and we talked about this, and I said, well, maybe, this is going to be your first dive on the Clotilda. In these conditions, you can't see anything. You're going to have to be able to hear them by touching this vessel. You're going to have to listen with your hands. How can you honor them? And so we came up with what's called an ancestral prayer. Can I share it with you, Jeremy?
Oh, I would absolutely love you to share it with me.
Yeah, it's called an ancestral prayer, and I'd say I'm gonna say this ancestral prayer before I even get in the water. After I geared up, got all my equipment on, was about to go down the ladder and jump into the water. And this is what I recited. Ancestral prayer for Clotilda's first dive, reviving the spirits who travel on the Clotilda. Beloved ancestors, your voices have been quiet for 162 years. But your silence ends now. Your voices and memory are lifted now from this wretched vessel through us, and we welcome you to speak through us. Our connection will never be broken. we are because of you. Thank you for reaching out to us. Blessings to your spirit always. I'm sorry, man.
No, it's powerful. I'm getting emotional. I'm getting emotional now. First off, thank you for sharing. Have you shared that with anyone before today?
I shared it with Jim, and just a few other people, but not publicly.
This is it's powerful. It's emotional for me.
Yeah.
Thank you, and even just thank you for even taking.
But every time I read it, man, it hits me. Yeah, sorry.
No reason to apologize. It's powerful, and the fact that you shared that with the audience and even with me is thank you. Thank you so much. And you said that prayer before you dived every time?
Yes. So this is the prayer for the first dive, the very first dive.
Yes, sir.
So I got in the water and made my way over to the Clotilda. And we had a buoy on the bow, and so we went down the bow, down the buoy line, and got to the bow. And I could only feel the Clotilda. I couldn't see it. And so when I got up close, real close, I could actually see it about an inch from my face. And so I started feeling my way, felt the bow, and felt the planking. There was some sharp edges where some had broken off. And so I was just feeling my way inch by inch, and just sensing the vessel. And I was looking for that bulkhead that I mentioned earlier. The bulkhead is like a wall into the ship that separates the compartments of the ship. And that first bulkhead was the cargo hold where the 110 was captured for the 2.5-month journey across the Atlantic. So as I was feeling my way, I came to that bulkhead. And I said, wow, this is it. This is where they were in prison for those 2.5 months. And I said, do I want to go in? I said, yes, I have to go in. And so I grabbed hook to the gun wall. That's the side walls of the vessel. And I did a couple of kicks and went over the side into the hole. Once I got into the hole, I began tumbling. And I got over 1,400 dives, and I'm a bit proficient in diving, right? But I was just tumbling. And I gained my composure. And once I got stabilized, Jeremy, I felt this embrace. And said, like, you okay? You're okay. And so I began to feel around and interrogate, and the floor of the hole has been removed, it's gone, but the supports are still there. And we knew that from some of the sonar images that we've taken. We can see those posts. And so I just was feeling around those posts. And as I was feeling around, I probably touched something with my fins, but it felt like something tugged on my fins. And I said, okay, I'm just going to let it be and embrace whatever happens. And as I was feeling around, there's a lot of sediment in the hole as well. And so I was reaching down in the hole, trying to at least reach to the bottom. But I was unable to reach the bottom. It's at a slant, so the top part is exposed. The bottom part has a lot of sediment in it. So I was reaching around, feeling around in sediment. I did feel a little rod, a metal piece that was in the hole. It might have been something of significance, but we didn't want to bring it up at the time. So we left it there. And I just began to just feel around the hole, as it were. And it got to a point where I think I need to let this place be, the sacredness of this place. And I decided to come up. And so when I got up and broke the surface, I just had to wait for a moment and take some deep breaths and recompose myself. So it was an incredible experience, to say the least. And as I mentioned earlier, nothing like that exists anywhere else in the historical record, where you actually have the actual hole, cargo hold, where our ancestors was kept. And it was just honor and a privilege and humbling to go through that experience.
Oh man.
And to do it for you guys, the direct descendants, and to be able to help you all tell the story. Yeah.
Oh man. Oh man. Powerful. Powerful. So what you were just describing was the cargo hold where my ancestors, Capoli and Rose Allen and the other 108, where they would have been.
Yes.
During the transportation on Clotilda.
Yes. And the space is no more than, I think it's 23 by 18 foot, no smaller than an average living room, right? You got 110 people crammed in this space for 2.5 months with all the bodily functions that they do during the voyage. Just the conditions, being laid on wood and exposed to essentially to the elements, and just the complete horror, malnourished, probably starvation and dehydration, just unimaginable. And I know we're talking about the Clotilda, but this happened on some 40,000 voyages during the trade. So,
when I interviewed Jim, he mentioned, and this may have been the time when he was down there with you during that particular dive. He mentioned reaching up and filling some planks, some boards, and he described that as the first time where he felt like that was where my ancestors may have been placed on their sides and basically packaged in side by side, which when he told me that story, my imagination had never taken me there, right? What I had always envisioned was them being in a room, as you described, a small room, apartment size, maybe 110 people, but I had never imagined them being perhaps on a board, side by side, basically side by side. And he took me there, and it was probably the most chilling visual at that particular moment I had ever experienced and thought. From your experience, is that what you felt when you reached up, and was that a plague you felt like they may have been, 110 may have been on these planks, these boards, basically laying on their side, sandwiched in? Is that what you felt, or can you kind of help me to kind of visualize what you experienced?
Yes. I definitely defer to Jim on this, because he's the premier maritime archaeologist, particularly ship architecture. But so when in all of this, they had very limited space, right? It's 23 by 18, just looking at it in plain view. And so if you go up the sides of the ships, it's very likely that they put in these shells, maybe one or two, I'm not absolutely sure. And that comes out, and that had basically an aisle in the middle with these two shelves. And so people laying on the bottom, sandwiched on the bottom, people sandwiched on the next shelf. And maybe even some laying in the aisle in between. all crammed to this small space. So I think if you get the image on the floor, the next shelf up that Jim was talking about, and then the total space is about 7 feet here, and it's narrow in the front, get wide, and it narrows again as it goes back. And so that's it. That's it. And I know, yeah, Jim set up sort of a model out in the park of just a flow plan of the space, and I think Darren and others walked into that space to get a sense of what it was like. But they were standing up, but it was even more crowded than that, stuffing all these people in a small space like that. And it wasn't about comfort or convenience. It was about getting as many bodies in the space as possible, so they can quote maximize on the profit of the commodification and commercialization of human flesh.
And I think, and for those that are listening to this podcast, there is a visual. We are also recording this visually, and I do plan on uploading the video to our YouTube channel so that you all can at least see the visual and the hand gestures that myself and Mr. Sadiki is showing. For me, that alone has just been transformational, right? Because, and you just said it so well, that the intent was to pack as many bodies in that cargo hold as possible. This wasn't a case where there was comfort. By any means was there no comfort. And the way that you described it, the way that Jim described it is so powerful to me, because it's amazing how the mind can hear a room and form its own kind of visual idea of what that would have been like. But now to even have you to go down into that cargo hold and to share that with descendants is so powerful, and to our audience. And I can't thank you enough for even just sharing that little bit of story and being that transparent with what you experienced. When you came back up, you mentioned you needed a minute to kind of capture yourself. Kind of share with me what that moment was like, when you were kind of capturing that moment and just sitting there in that moment.
Yeah, Jeremy. Yeah, in one sense, it was like, the 110 emerging from the whole of that vessel after that horrific journey and seeing the sunlight, breathing fresh air again. And in another sense, it was like assessing what did I just experience. And so it was a range of emotions, just feeling one, honored to have had that experience of diving such a rare artifact, and two, how can this be a part of this story? How can we continue this story based on not just the archaeology but the human aspect of the story, the people who went through this experience? How can we continue to how can we continue that being part of this story and never really lose focus on the 110 being the central theme of the story? Although the ship is critically important, I think the Descendant Association has made it clear they want to focus on the people, but we have to really understand that the reason we focus on those people is because of this artifact, this ship. And so we have to say what this artifact means, how it impacted those 110, but most importantly, tell the story of those 110 as well. So it affected me in many ways, Jeremy, and I'm still sort of processing it, if you will. And hopefully, it could be another positive contribution to this whole narrative around the Clotilda.
I know we're close to time, so I'll give you some real quick ones. What have we learned so far post the 10-day exploration? Is there anything that you can share with us that what we've learned so far from this?
Yeah, I think Jim might have touched on some of those things. And I don't want to, of course, definitely don't want to upstage him. But a report is going to be coming out soon. But we've gotten way down the road in terms of what we know about this vessel and the story that is going to help inform the descendant community and the world about this vessel. We saw some artifacts, located some artifacts of this vessel, some that's been shown in picture by the Alabama Historical Commission, and some hadn't. But the report is going to reveal all of that, and but I can say for sure with confidence that we've gotten down the road way further from this mission, and it'll be revelatory for sure to the community and the world once that report hits the streets, if it's become public facing, if you will. So yeah, I guess I'll kind of leave it at that, Jeremy. You can see I'm hedging a bit because I don't want to get ahead of Jim.
I understand, and that's fair. But I just wanted to ask, and we'll wait on the report. We'll wait on to hear what we hear from Jim, and I definitely plan on having him back on the show, and maybe even if you're open to a post reaction once the information is out there, and we can kind of even dive a little bit deeper and dissect it a little bit more.
Sure.
Final question. I think I know the answer, but I'm curious to hear from you. You mentioned you've done several dives. I think you said over 5 or 6 slave wreck specifically.
Mm-hmm.
How do you rate this dive overall in the hundreds of dives that you've done?
Yeah. This is, the other dives wasn't as challenging. It was in clear water, and it's basically looking at artifacts that was been scattered over a very broad wrecking landscape. But Clotilda is very concentrated. And this is why the Clotilda is so critically important. We can actually see the vessel itself. We can see the shape of the vessel. We can see where the 110 were held. And as I've said over and over again, it's nothing like that exists in the historical record. So it's at the top of the list for sure. In terms of the dives of the vessels, I've dove on the South of the Africa. I've seen artifacts including shackles from that vessels. I recovered one. The Guerrero, which we're 90% certain of where it's located. We've seen artifacts from the Guerrero, and a couple of wrecks down in Costa Rica that I've dove on. But Clotilda, that's at the top of the list, man. So it's so critically important, not because it's just the last slave. Well, in some ways, because it's the last vessel that brought Africans into this country illegally. But more importantly, the role that it played in human history, and the lack of information and knowledge in the public square about this vessel. It's the Clotilda story should be part of the civics course in every high school, elementary school in this country, but it's not. And there's efforts to repress it as opposed to broaden the story. And so, to be a part of this experience is just incredible, and be able to dive it, I have to put it at the top of the list for sure.
Thank you for that. Final question, and it really is not even a question. Final thought. What would you want to leave this audience with that tune in? Anything you want to share? Any words? Just if you can just kind of leave us with one thought or one thing.
Yeah, sure. I guess it would be, we as human beings, memory is very important, right? And if you know anything about African cosmology, um, having knowledge or memory of where you came from, who your ancestors were, is critically important just for your basic humanity. Who was my grandma? Where did my great grandma come from? You know, so I would encourage your listeners to dig back, remember your ancestors, honor them, and build upon those legacies, whatever that story might be. Don't we have to get beyond the silence and the shame, particularly as it relates to the trade. You know, it happened to our ancestors, and we have to never let that story die. We should never forget, right? And so I would say, remember your ancestors, honor their legacy, and continue their stories, and build upon that legacy.
Kamau Sadiki, thank you for your time. Thank you for passion. Thank you for all the work that you're doing. As a descendant of two of the enslaved Africans that were in that cargo hold where you were. I'm honored. I'm grateful for you to share that story and for the passion that you shared it with and the emotion and to capture that on Justice for the 110. So salute, thank you, and I hope to have you back soon once the report is released. So thank you.
Thank you, Jeremy. It's been an honor and a pleasure, and thank you for the critical work that you're doing and continuing to do. I really appreciate your work, man. Thank you.
Yeah, I appreciate it. Thank you.